Morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. We'll start the board meeting now. We have, as you can see, a very, very crowded agenda today. And unfortunately, the fact is that Daniel and I have to leave to go to a meeting a very important meeting in London called by the Chief Executive of the NHS for London Trusts. And so it really is a hard close for us at the end of this. So I will be pushing the agenda along quite quickly today because of that. So before we start the formal meeting, we've just all been on one of our 15 steps walks to various parts of the hospital, and I'm going to ask people to report back. But unlike usually when we can get fairly full feedback, I'd like people to give their detailed feedback to the relevant execs, but just sort of, if you like, bring out the main single point of their visit, just so that we can be assured about that, because we need to make some progress today. So I'd like to start with Dan and Pat. We went to pharmacy.
Yes, I think Dan's not.
Oh, it's Dan. Well, Pat, you can do it.
Yes, we went to Pharmacy Stores, which is downstairs on the bottom of Ferguson House. It does, I have to say, feel a very old-fashioned style of stores, which you might not expect to see in a modern hospital. I know this is something that everybody is concerned about, the pharmacy, whether we've got an up-to-date pharmacy. The staff are incredibly helpful and busy and friendly, and a lot of them have been there a long time, although they're actually short-staffed, but looking to recruit some new members. Despite it being sort of below ground, it's quite light and it's cool because, of course, the drugs have to be kept cool. But the main observation really is that there's so much paper-based systems that it just feels terribly old-fashioned. And although there's no particular sign that anything's going wrong, it just doesn't feel efficient. I think that would be my main observation.
Would any exec like to respond to that?
So I think we certainly recognise that the in the basement is not ideal, and there's certainly, we have done some work. I think that the trust has had quite a lot of work around looking at modernising pharmacy stores and putting a robot in that as well. But we are doing the work, and there is a business case that's being worked up about how could we look at centralising both our stores across both Epsom and Helier. But I think our challenge is certainly currently is around the capital that requires in terms of delivering that modernisation of the pharmacy stores, because the robot, is around approximately £1 million on its own, and we have to do a lot of decanting and moving around. So I think our challenge is about how can we finance that, but we're certainly, it's on our agenda.
I think there is also an issue about staff morale, in that they're working in this environment, although they were not complaining about it. But there was just sort of as a little highlight, the trolleys that they move the drugs around on are so old, and they're a little bit like those supermarket trolleys which have wheels that don't go terribly straight. I mean, I wouldn't want to push them around all day. And apparently they have put in for new trolleys. And I think just on a morale basis, it would be nice for those staff who are loyally working down there to have some new trolleys.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that, Pat. New trolleys doesn't sound to me like a massive, massive amount of money. So hopefully we can... I'll find it is, will I? Okay. Right. Maybe Tesco's would like to donate some of their second-hand ones. Right, let's move on to... thanks very much, Pat. To Aruna and... where's Aruna? She's still... Oh, I know where she is. Right, so Rakesh and Thursday.
So Thursday, Aruna and I went to Marymore, which is a 37-bedded ward on D block. Quite often it does escalate with 2 additional beds to 39 beds. Nikki Watkins, the matron, took us around, so we bumped into her and she kindly took a 10-minute detour to take us around. The ward was very busy. There were lots of nurses with drugs and junior doctors scurrying around. It looked a very busy ward. A couple of takeaways from us was the 2 beds that quite often we do escalate into what were in very small rooms, and we felt maybe it was inappropriately small when we do go into those 2 beds, but they have been empty for some time in the recent past. The other takeaway was the whiteboard wasn't on, so I don't think people had logged into the whiteboard. Oh, is there a right? Okay, so there was, and they do want another whiteboard in the MDT room as well. So I said I'd have a word with you, Peter, on that, and that would make life much easier for them. And lastly, one of the consultants wasn't there below the elbow, and regularly so, been asked to be before as well in the past.
Okay, thank you.
Was there anything else?
Anything else? Thank you very much. Associate Ruth, you went to A3?
So I went to A3, and my succinct feedback would be teams and staff very happy with the care they're able to provide and the care they're receiving, but one thing they wanted us to be cited on, which is the delay in getting physiotherapy if you're a resident in the Epsom area, but you don't need to have ongoing ward-based care. So if you finish your acute pathway here at St Helier and you're actually ready for discharge, so you don't need to go back for rehabilitation to the hospital, they're currently experiencing 14-week waits for physiotherapy. So that felt like a very important piece of feedback that we will pick up and progress. Indeed, that's what I said. So the teams were thrilled to hear that we were seeking feedback, and I said that was something I thought that actually we could raise and we were able to address, and they thanked us very much for that.
Thank you, Ruth. The next one is Daniel, myself, and Chris, and we went to A5, which is the care of the elderly ward, for people who are, in many ways, probably don't need to be in an acute hospital, but in the absence of anywhere else around here, that's where a lot of the elderly people do seem to stay. Anyway, Daniel, would you like to just summarise? Well, Chris, would you like to summarise either of?
So we had a good introduction to the ward by the ward sister, who was obviously, it seemed to me, on top of what goes on in that ward. The ward was generally neat and tidy, though obviously the patients in it were very frail and would need looking after. We also talked to the consultant. I think the takeaway points I took were, first of all, there was an MDT just about to start, which was good, though it was waiting for the doctors to turn up, they thought, from the grand round, which is sort of how one balances off those 2 priorities. We were about 7 people sat around waiting for somebody else to turn up. I don't know what the answer to is, but there's obviously something there about efficiency. They don't have a whiteboard in the MDT room. That could be something I think they would benefit from. They had a paper version of it. Again, the whiteboard on the ward wasn't working. Presumably the same thing. Yeah. Talking to the MDT team, I think they felt they had good relationships with social services, but they weren't always able to attend the meetings, MDT meetings, and that would be helpful, particularly with the nature of the problems that their patients on that ward have. They're going to need some form of social care when they go home. And secondly, they felt that, well, they don't have input from any of our community in-reach services onto the ward to support their discharge planning, and they felt that that would be helpful as well going forward. That's it.
Anything to add, Daniel?
So Trevor needs to take an urgent look at the fire escape outside A5.
Oh yeah.
Is that to do with heating?
Yes. And perhaps the board manager's big worry is staffing. So she did have enough staff today by changing the skill mix between the qualifieds and the unqualifieds, but she's got lots of band 5 vacancies and so keen that we fill them. But also recognising her ward has become one of the great training grounds for the hospital, so lots of new staff come in, stay 18 months, and then what she says is really positive is they're now getting their promotion in another place in Epsom and St Helier as opposed to leaving. So that bit is very good.
Yes, that was very positive. I mean, she's a very, very enthusiastic and competent ward sister, and the trust needs many more like her. And she was really on top of what was going on in her ward. She knew exactly when we ran through the list of all the, if you like, the stuff that just should be right. You know, is your drugs trolley locked and so on? Everything absolutely perfect. So a really, really great ward sister. And I think very proud of the fact that she's training people up who move on to A&E or to other parts of the trust. But just like all of our wards, she is suffering from the national lack of shortage of nurses. Right, let's just move on finally to Peter and Elizabeth.
Hello. Yes, we went to A6, which is the higher acuity ward than A5.
One's female and one's male.
Oh, really? No, A6 is...
Yes, it's female and A5 is male.
Okay. Oh, right. Okay. Well...
But ladies are perhaps more acute.
I mean, it's a very busy ward, and one of the things that was obvious to Peter and I is that all of the staff looked happy. They all had big smiles on their faces. They all spoke about what a nice working environment it was. There seemed to be a significant number of people who had worked on the ward for many years, and that was very positive. We did the themes that you've heard already this morning. Yes, they would very much like to have more nurses, and the consultant told us that that was a very significant factor. Also, when their ward is fully staffed, it is one of the wards where people are taken off to go on to other wards where there is a need, which obviously is disruptive. And we spent quite a bit of time talking with the therapy staff. And they raised two issues with us, didn't they, Peter? One was that they felt that given that the acuity of the patients which they're dealing with has increased in the last 2 or 3 years, they needed more therapists in order to move people through the system quicker. And they also, Trevor, highlighted a problem with their therapy room, where they told us the radiators haven't been working, so they haven't been able to take patients in there for some time. So if we could follow up on that. Was there anything else, Peter, you wanted to mention?
No, you're right. I think the significant issue was around nursing staffing and therapy staffing was what people felt was the key issue that needed to work for us.
Thank you. Just moving on, Trevor and Martin went to Frank D's. Martin?
I'll keep it brief. The ward was very calm, very well organised, in spite of the fact that it was clearly very busy, and the staffing, at least today, was okay. They certainly have challenges, but they were at the right numbers today. And the only thing we found around the environment was that one of the fire exits had been blocked because they'd been using it to store stuff, although we were able to move it. Trevor?
Yeah, I think that is quite good. It's good that they were fully staffed today, although that does seem to be an issue that they're saying is challenging around keeping staff and recruitment. Obviously impacts on the environment. We know is tarred. It's an old modular building, so there's some bits and pieces that we felt we could do some minor bits of work to improve that I'll pick up. And I suppose the other thing was that there's a little bit of an issue around, and I think we're aware of it, Arlene, around the collection of the air mattresses, and that there still seems to be a delay that they're concerned about. So I need to get on and sort that out.
Thank you, Trevor. And then finally, it's James and Debbie and Derek. So
I'll start.
Yes, thanks.
Lawrence. So we went to the emergency department, and we spent most of our time actually looking at the very front end, looking at the waiting room, and having a conversation with the streaming nurses and the reception staff. It was calm, it looked controlled. The reception staff present as sort of a happy team. They acknowledge that they have significant stresses from time to time, but overall they feel like a cohesive team. We had a conversation with some people who were waiting. They both basically articulated positive experiences. They were both, they'd used the service on quite a few occasions. One commented that she specifically came here rather than St George's because we were much better. The other one, the gentleman that I spoke to, didn't know how long he needed to wait to be seen for streaming. One of the problems today is that the IT infrastructure isn't working. It's a common theme. So the board that displays the waiting times was not in operation. The reception staff told us what they normally do, which sounds like quite a good process for demonstrating the waiting times, but this frequent user said he was usually very unaware about how long he needed to wait, so maybe we've got some work to do on communication. And a recurrent theme, talking to the reception staff, the streaming nurse, and the nurses in the majors department, they all had little gripes about the functionality of the IT system to support their work, and they felt it was quite slow and clunky.
Thanks very much. I'm going to stop it there because in the interest of time, so thanks very much for all the 15 steps feedback, and all the issues, of course, which have been raised will be attended to. So welcome everybody. Do we have many apologies for absence? Richard is here. Hello. Richard was just at the back. Morning, Richard. Thank you. Are there any new declarations of interest? Good. And then, in which case, I'm going to go straight on to the public, the minutes of the last board. So, in the interest of time, I'm going to ask people if they have any comments on the interest, in the minutes of the last board. Thank you. And in that case, I'm going to go on to my chairman's update, which is very brief, but the first and most important thing to do is to welcome Professor Derek McCallum. For those of you who remember, Professor Ian McPhee was Derek's predecessor, nominated by St George's University Hospital, the university part, the teaching part of St George's. Ian left us, and Derek has been nominated by St George's to take Ian's place. Derek is a professor of infectious diseases at St George's, but is also still clinical and does work with patients. I would have hoped to have welcomed Derek formally as a non-executive director, but the formalities up at the appointments part of NHSI take some little time, and so Derek is officially here today as an observer. I have absolutely no doubt that within a day or two he will be formally appointed, but his role today is as an observer, but it's very nice to welcome Derek, and we hope that you enjoy your appointment here just as much as Professor McPhee and Professor Oliveira before him. So thank you very much, Derek. The other update I would like to make is about our chief executive, who has been elected to the board of an organisation called NHS Providers. NHS Providers, you may not have heard of them much, but they are, if you like, the membership organisation and lobby organisation for all of England's trusts, hospital trusts, ambulance trusts, community trusts. All of the trusts in England are members of NHS Providers, and they do a lot of great work. They publish lots of papers on various issues. but they also, and very critically, have a hotline to the top of NHS England and NHS Improvement, and to the Department of Health and to the Minister, and they make sure that the interests of trusts are always recognised by those making policy decisions, and the impact of any policy decisions that may be coming out of the Department of Health or from the top of NHS England. A very important organisation, and Daniel wasn't just appointed, he was elected, so that's, I think, is even more of a surprising, even more of a tribute to his skills. So, how long is your term?
3 years.
3 years. So for the next 3 years, Daniel will be, as well as being the chief executive here, he will also be on the board of NHS providers, and it's a very, very good thing for us, because it will bring Daniel into contact with a lot of very useful people, and it will be very helpful. So that's the end of my update. Daniel, would you like to do your report?
Thank you, Lawrence. Yes. It's the first time I've ever been elected to anything in my life. So in my report, this is very long because an awful lot has been happening. So it starts with the Care Quality Commission. I think we must have had a visit from the Care Quality Commission at least every month for about the last 6 months. And the 3 most recent have been an unannounced inspection of A&E on both sides, maternity on both sides, medicine at Epsom and surgery at St Helier. A 2-day inspection, that went on for 2 days. We've had a 2-day well-led inspection, and we've had a whole day on use of resources. We've had verbally some quite positive feedback. We've also had in writing some issues, which we are responding to. It will all come together in a big new report into Epsom and Helier, which will be published, it looks like, at the beginning of September, or possibly just after the August bank holiday weekend. So can't tell you what it says yet, because we haven't seen it, but lots of work going on. I think one of the things to celebrate was the CQC really did notice how much we had been doing in the equality diversity space and in valuing our staff and listening to what our staff have to say. And they told us verbally they were going to write, they were commending the book of respect that we have written. So there's definitely some positives coming out of the CQC stuff. So in April we took on responsibility with our partners for adult community health services in Sutton and Surrey Downs, and we've had some really big launch events with the staff. The enthusiasm is enormous, the opportunity is very big. We've managed the transition, it's about 1,000 people in various different settings from 4 different organisations, I think relatively smoothly. So I think there are lots of, as ever, teething issues with IT and forms and all the rest of it, but the care has not stopped in all of this. I've been to visit some of the staff in both Epsom and Sutton community services. Then we decided that most of our other hospitals around us do a stakeholder newsletter every month to all their partners, so we decided to do one too. The first edition was in May. We've named it after our hospital bus route, the H1, and so every month now we're going to write a partner bulletin. The one for May focused on all the money we're going to spend on the Epsom Hospital site in the next few years following the land sale, to try and dispel quite a lot of myths and untruths that are being said in public about it. On this site, we opened our brand new Hemodialysis Unit a few weeks ago. That's also a big success, massively improved patient environment, and the staff love it too. There's a new building being constructed on the Epsom site, and so we got to block M, and so we had a little, what do we call block M? So it's going to be called Mole Valley Block, because we thought we should find something that began with an M. So it will be habited in the next 4 weeks, do you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
Beginning of July.
Beginning of July. And it's the new clinical admin building, essentially. Then I wrote a little paragraph about cancer and how proud we were we delivered the cancer targets for last year. when I wrote that, of course, I didn't realise the BBC were going to run a massive story yesterday saying the NHS is failing on cancer targets, but they did helpfully put in the table of the top 10 best performers on cancer, of which we're one of the top 10. So that is really good news. We've done well at organ donation. Again, that's becoming a recurrent theme, so that's good. There's a bit on recruitment. So one of the not so good statistics has been that in the last year you were 2.48 more, it goes down to 1.33. Yeah, you were 2.48 more times more likely to get a job in Epsom and Helier if you were white than if you were from a BME background. We thought that was completely unacceptable. We've been doing lots of things about that, including ensuring that every interview panel for a band 6, which is a sort of lower middle level in the structure, has a BME and a woman person on the panel. That doesn't sound quite right, does it? As both a woman and the BME representative on the panel. And since we started doing that, your chances of getting a job in Epsom and Helier if you are white is now only 1.33 times more likely. So that has had a big impact, and we're very happy about that. Very soon, if you apply for a job in Epsom and St Helier, before you actually get to your interview, you're going to be asked some questions about how would you respond to a number of different scenarios. So we start recruiting people who share the values of everyone that we want to have in Epsom and St Helier. And we've been road testing what the scenarios are and what the Epsom and St Helier answers are with staff, and many hundreds of people have had a go now, so that's quite good. Arlene has led an incredible Nurses' Day set of celebrations. Hundreds of nurses came together in Bournehall and lots of awards. There's the usual array of gold badges and Epsom and Helier heroes. Something that we're also quite proud of is our yellow badges have had an unintended consequence of, because people know who is treating them because it's so visible, they've given loads more feedback on friends and family, identifying people who have given them good care because they can actually see it. So that's quite a good thing. We've been 20. We became 20 in April. So Tom Brake, one of the local MPs, brought in some birthday cards that his constituents had made. And then lastly, to celebrate 20 years, we did a walk between Epsom and St Helier hospitals where every department could raise money for their own department. And it's now got to £25,000, the money that people raised, and the Trust said it would match it. So we've got £50,000 of small-scale improvement projects now to deliver this year in lots and lots of different places to keep Trevor's team very busy. But I think the ward was a massive success. The walk was a massive success, and I think we better do it again next year when we become 21. There you go.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Lots of interesting stuff going on. I particularly commend the new Hemodialysis Unit. I had a look round it. It is absolutely fantastic, and compared to what it used to be like, it's just a huge step up and a really good example of what can be done with a goodwill. It's in the, if you remember, the old restaurant. It's where the old restaurant was on the ground floor, and it's really worth just, if you can, stick your head in and have a look at it. It's really, really, really exciting place. Good. So we're now going to go on to the integrated performance report, and following our well-led review that we've had from our team, we're going to do this in a slightly different way. So what I'd like to do is to invite the non-exec chairs of each committee to give a brief report on their area. So I'd like to start with Pat. And, well, would you like me to start with someone else, Pat?
No.
Are you all right? So Pat, please,
Yes,
on patient safety.
We've had two meetings of the Patient Safety and Quality Committee since the last public board. The first one was on the 26th of April, and which is a little while ago, but we had a very impressive presentation from the stroke team on that occasion. We had asked for this to happen because although we had been reassured that patients who did not spend the target time on the stroke ward were getting proper care and the right patients were being moved into a non-stroke ward rather than the more acutely ill ones. We wanted to assure ourselves that this was the case. So that's why we had this presentation, which was we did get the assurance we needed, and we heard that all patients, whether they're on the stroke ward itself or on another ward, got regular nursing from stroke nurses, and that there had been no moves back from that situation back onto the stroke ward, showing that the care had not been sufficient. And the overall stats on outcomes for stroke patients were extremely good. So that was one of the things we had in April. The second one we had was a discussion about children's attendance mental health cases in A&E. And this is a concern that we have got, and we referred again to in the later meeting, and we are going to have, we're having a deep dive into the care of mentally ill young people, because there is an issue, particularly in Epsom, where we are not able to discharge them to the care of the mental health team, and we have to look after them in possibly not the best place for them or the other paediatric patients on the ward. So that's something we also discussed in April. And we also are at every meeting looking at patient transport, because as you will know, we took over this from an outsourced service because that was unsatisfactory, and it's quite challenging. I think, Trevor, you would agree. But we are keeping an eye on how that is improving, and it is improving, particularly in terms of inbound journeys for renal patients, where if they don't arrive on time, they are at risk of not having their full dialysis service. So those are the three things we specifically looked at, apart from many other things that we look at on a regular basis at every meeting, such as our part of the IPR, the board assurance framework. We hear updates on the CQC and on SIs, serious incidents. At April, we also saw the action plan for the dementia strategy, dementia and delirium strategy, which we've been waiting for a little while. Not for anybody's fault, but because so much else is going on. And we are going to look at that again in September, when we hope that the actions that are promised will be showing some coming to fruition, and that they'll actually be in place, because large numbers of our patients are suffering from dementia or come in with signs of delirium, and it's extremely important that those are recognised early on and managed in an appropriate way. We also approved the draft quality account on that occasion, and we had the Q4 patient experience report. So a very busy meeting. It was the last meeting for Ian McPhee. We were sorry to see him go, but we welcomed Eric, I hope, to the next meeting of this committee. So the second meeting was on the 31st of May, where we approved the quality account, which goes with the annual accounts, and had been then to stakeholders for their comments to be received. We had an update on our concerns about the mental health paediatrics at Epsom, and we were pleased to hear that there was talk already taking place between the Mental Health Trust and commissioners, because there is a concern that actually not sufficient support is being commissioned. So it's not that there's a deeper problem for managing these very sick young people. We discussed pharmacy issues at the last meeting. This is something that's been highlighted by the CQC, which we will hear more about in due course, I'm sure. And we also reviewed the way that we collect VTE data, because there was a question mark from Audit, our external auditors, which I'm sure Elizabeth will mention in her report from the Audit Committee. And we wanted to make sure that we are collecting those both accurately and in a way that means that we address the underlying issues, should there be any, about these tests. We discussed as well how we are going to embed the community services, the new community services issues that are relevant to our committee, and how we integrate them. We will be inviting Thurza to suggest who she would want to attend if it cannot be her, at our committee, in order to ensure that all of that work is fully overseen by the board. And again, we had regular reports on the integrated performance report. We had an update on A&E, which we'll be following up on, because that has been under enormous pressure over these last several weeks. And also we had a summary of the topics that are discussed at quality half days that the staff attend, and also grand rounds, because we wanted to be sure that issues that are raised in serious incident reports are picked up and followed through, because there are themes that appear, that emerge through those incidents, which is important that all staff, or at least all relevant staff, are aware of, even if they weren't involved in the specific incident. And we were very pleased to see that those themes that we recognise as appearing on a regular basis are appearing in the training days. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pat, anyone have any comments on the very comprehensive discussion of the two meetings?
Lawrence, perhaps we can pick up the conversation about the VT reporting once Elizabeth has commented on the audit report.
Yes,
both from a clinical and an audit perspective.
Elizabeth's audit report back is later on in the later on. So I think we can bring that forward. I mean, the VTE thing particularly, if we could just do that, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Do you want just the VTE?
Yes.
Okay. As I'm sure everybody understands, one of the reports which our external auditors, who are KPMG, have to give an opinion on is our quality account. As part of their work, they carry out what is technically termed some limited testing, which means that they only test a very, very small sample, much smaller than the sample sizes that they use for testing our financial reports. And there are two indicators that they were required to test, which were our VTE, venal thrombosis embolism data, and also our C. diff data. During the course of their testing of our VTE data, they identified a difference between the way in which we are capturing data and the national guidance. Ruth and James will correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, we were working on the principle that we had 36 hours, was it, in which to carry out an assessment of risk for VTE, and the guidance is actually 24 hours?
I'll pick that up.
Right. And therefore, some of our data where we had recorded that we were in accordance with the guidance, actually we were outside of the appropriate limits. As a consequence of that, the audit opinion which we have received on the quality account, and this is a very, very technical presentation of the way it is. We have a clean report on our quality account, which is called a limited assurance report because of the small sample sizes I mentioned. However, KPMG have been unable to give a clean report on these two items, the VTE and the C. diff. When this was brought to our attention, we immediately referred it to PSQ, and as you have already heard from Pat, a deep dive into this has been initiated. The important point, well, the two important points are that, first of all, as James, I'm sure, will wish to confirm, patients have not been harmed because of this. And the second point is that this does not indicate that we do not have confidence in the rest of the data within the performance report. And I can assure you that we have taken this extremely seriously and we have taken action immediately.
So thank you, Elizabeth. So firstly, the board will be aware that our attainment of VT reporting has been challenged over the past year or two, and we have struggled to meet the national standard of 95% of our patients having a electronically documented VT assessment. During the audit, it's come to light, as Elizabeth has indicated, that we have been reporting against what our interpretation of our contract with our commissioners has been, which is a little bit ambiguous, and we've documented compliance where a VT assessment has been completed during the admission, rather than the NICE guidance, which suggests that the VT assessment should be completed within 24 hours. So now that that has come to our attention, we are rectifying the reporting. So I'm looking at Peter, but I understand from the next IPR, we will be reporting in line with a VT assessment being completed within 24 hours, and we will shadow report what we have historically been reported until we have assurance that our performance has improved. Arlene and myself have met with the specialist nurses who support the VTE assessments, so that we can help them help the clinicians perform a timely VTE assessment. We've identified that there are some IT solutions that are certainly have the potential to ensure that the VT assessments are completed, and we propose to have a discussion in our Trust Executive Committee next week with our clinical leads and clinical directors to make sure that all the clinical teams are supportive of the proposed changes to ensure that the VTE assessments are completed.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Elizabeth. I think it's clear that whilst we have been assiduous in doing the VTE assessments, we have not been, I think it's just basically a mistake that we made. We had assumed that they should be done within 36 hours, which is what we'd agreed with our commissioners, and the guidelines nationally say 24 hours. So in many ways we're grateful that this has been brought to our attention, and we are going to, as James said, put new practices in place so that we will comply with that particular NICE guideline.
And from speaking as a clinician, it's clearly right and appropriate that the clinical assessment is performed on admission, so that a suitable prevention can be instigated immediately that patients are admitted. So we're very supportive of those guidelines.
Good, thank you very much. Let's move on now to Aruna. Can you just give us the highlights of performance and risk?
Yep.
Thank you.
So in the absence of Ian,
that would help. So yes, we had actually our last park meeting. So just for everybody to know that based on what the guidance we received from Frontline, we have dissolved park, and it's much better governance now. Park has got to a point where we can clearly understand our risks, and therefore it is now time for us to transfer the risks we've identified to the appropriate committees. So, and also the performance piece of Park is going to be transferred to the Finance Committee. So the things we discussed at our last Park, from a performance perspective, I think we've heard really good news on the cancer front, so obviously that's come off the risk register. On the RTT targets, although we're not at 92%, we have done much better than we actually expected to do, so good progress on that front. ED, still very challenging, and I don't know if Dan wants to comment on ED and the continuing challenges we have.
So the broad outline, I was chatting to some of the chief operating officers locally yesterday, and there seems to be a theme in southwest London and North Surrey of all of the hospitals are seeing days in May and June that they would expect to have seen in January, February time. We're all seeing somewhere between 5 and 10% growth of our most sick patients, and nobody can quite explain at the moment why it is we're seeing such sick patients in such volumes at this time of year. So there's clearly a common theme, and that ties to some of our shortfalls in the middle grade rota, and we've been able to fill most of the shifts, but the amount of effort and cost involved in doing that is considerable. So there's a great deal of pressure on all of the emergency services locally.
And I think it's fair to say we do track people that are, from an RTT perspective, waiting very long for treatment, but we believe we had assurance that even those waiting 40 weeks plus have not come to any harm. So that's really good news. We went through the usual putting on more risks and taking off some. Obviously, we removed the cancer risks. We were hopeful in terms of being able to remove the C. diff and MRSA, but we've had another incident, so we were not able to remove that. We did add a few significant risks, such as child safeguarding. We rewording the Brexit risk that we're having. And the control total risk came off and on in 2 meetings, because we met our control total for March, but then again, we now run the risk for the following year. I think those are the salient points. Peter, do you want to add anything?
I think that's fine. I think the key around the performance components that Anne has picked up on. Dan, is there anything else around our broader range of performance issues that you want to cover off?
So the only other one I would mention is diagnostics, which has been difficult because we have had significant equipment failures. In part, we know that our echocardiogram machines have been under pressure. We've got a programme to replace them. We're buying 3 new ones this year, and we will have a rolling programme to replace some more next year, and that has led to some delays. And on top of that, we know that our MRI capacity has been under considerable pressure, in part linked to the large rise in cancer referrals, which is driving complex diagnostic tests. And again, that's one of the reasons we're requiring an additional MRI scanner for later in the year.
Dan, sorry, are there other areas of significant equipment failure or challenge that are worth mentioning at this point, or is it just those 2 principal areas?
So if you look across the year, the previous 12 months, we have had spikes. So our gynecological urodynamics equipment, both of those machines failed and had to be replaced, and that affected our diagnostic performance in the early part of the late winter, early spring. We have had equipment failures of our CT units, which is one of the reasons that's being replaced, and there's a live programme now. There's a temporary unit in the car park of Epsom to replace that, but we've lost our CT in Epsom for up to a week at a time, partly because parts are in short supply and in part because the equipment's so old. So it's the capital intensive single or very short supply units.
So is it that we have either been let down by maintenance contracts, or that we have allowed maintenance to slip in our own sort of management, or is it just the equipment so old?
It's very much the latter. If you look at our cardiac echo machines, they're nearly all over 10 years old. They are reaching the end of their useful life, which is why we've got a rolling programme. The MRI and the CT were known older items of equipment, which is why we had a programme to replace them. But I don't think it's about maintenance. If I look at the CT and when the equipment broke, the maintainers and the service contractors were on site within the required period. They did their diagnostic, the machine required a part, that was installed within the required time, that part in turn failed. So the CT in Epsom went through 4 spare parts in terms of a series of failures, and that's why we're replacing the machine itself now rather than trying to maintain it. It's about a 10-week programme. It started at the beginning of this week, and I'm confident it'll run to time.
So apologies for continuing to delve on this one, but as we then look at our capital programme for the current year, and I know we're under some pressures for our capital programme, to what extent do we feel that we are still carrying significant risks in relation to the equipment, because we don't have the allocation of resource to be able to upgrade or replace what we would like to or feel is necessary.
So when we went through the capital equipment allocation process, which we did with all of the clinical leads in the operational management group, we received all of the bids for people based on both new service developments and on where equipment was reaching the end of its life. In several areas where we would want to buy all of the new things, so cardiac echo machines is a particular concern, we would have ideally wanted to replace them all, but we accept that it's not there, and the clinicians accepted a rolling programme. Part of the challenge was that last year, when we would have wanted to begin that programme, that was quite a challenging financial envelope to buy it in. So when one of them failed last year, we agreed to buy one out of the capital reserve last year. We accelerated the acquisition of one out of this year's budget, but we've had to accept the reality that these machines are about £100,000 to £120,000 each, and we simply can't afford to buy them all in one go. We also have compounding. I mean, it's a very generous financial envelope. We've never spent 1.9 million on medical equipment in a single year before. Once you take out the multi-year buys we've already had to commit to, so the anaesthetic machines, the neonate monitors, you come down to about 1.1 million for everything else with a small reserve, and everything is having to come out of that pot. So that's why we've had to commit to some multi-year buys in several areas.
So I'd just like to put it in the perspective of, we'd love to spend more money on both IT and medical equipment, but we have to prioritise in our capital planning maintaining our buildings, and we spend disproportionately too much money on the buildings relative to the equipment because it's by necessity. But if we had better buildings, we would spend more of our capital on medical equipment.
I think Dan alluded to it, but just to be more explicit, when we did do the prioritization for the medical equipment, what we have agreed more formally is to have a rolling program. So what we've asked the divisions to do is to start identifying a program of replacements that straddles 3 years, and I think we're going to start that in the summer and autumn and start prioritizing that so we know what the program looks like 2-3 years ahead.
As a clinician, Dan, myself and Rakesh were in the meeting with the clinical divisions where the resource allocation for medical equipment was allocated. I'm very comfortable and confident that each of the divisions had done a bottom-up assessment of the risks to their division with regard to medical equipment, and that there was a very sensible discussion between the divisions about the allocation of the medical equipment. And I think each of the divisions left that meeting with a shared understanding and were confident that we had made the right allocation for this year. There is quite a small contingency, which I think we need to keep close to, and there is a process where divisions can bring up any emerging risks through the year, which will be discussed across the divisions about prioritisation.
Can I just add to that? As well as prioritising, we asked ourselves another question, which is, if we don't buy the piece of equipment that's fallen below the line, what is the operational and clinical risk of not buying that piece of equipment? And that second order set of questioning then led us to the point where we put another couple of things back into the mix and decided to accept less contingency and put more things in up front. So I think we've been through quite a rigorous process to work out where the concerns absolutely are.
So it feels very much as though the planning and the thought process and the risk assessment that's gone into that is very strong. What I would suggest we might want to do is to ensure that we have a regular review of how we're actually performing against that plan, whether or not we're storing up incremental risks, and let that flow up, that discussion flow up through what I guess is now finance and performance.
Thanks very much. I think that's a really useful discussion on that. It's clear that like most trusts, we don't have enough capital and we have to prioritise. I'm satisfied that we are prioritising as best as we can, but the the fundamental answer is to get some more capital, if we can. Right, let's move on.
Could I just add
Sorry.
that, obviously, the other thing is that in terms of the equipment, we do also have a radiology managed contract, and that is a rolling programme. So there is about £1.2 million that we got this year for actual radiology equipment replacement as well. So there is a programme, and we are investing more than we normally have on equipment that as well. So I think that's a separate to the equipment part that you've got.
Thank you. Richard, would you like to summarise finance?
Yeah, sure. So I'll keep it reasonably brief. So I think there are 3 meetings we're picking up on here. The first at the end of March, which reviewed the February normal monthly reporting, but also critically we finalised our acceptance of the control total for the 2019-20 year. That involves accepting a control total which involves a deficit after the various forms of funding of just under £7 million deficit. There are inevitably a whole raft of risks that are embedded within that, not least of which is improving our underlying recurring deficit, as well as in part of that delivering on a further CIP programme. So it remains very challenging, and there is a lot of risk and uncertainty attached to that. The other component which is different this year is that there's much more focus on the system control total as a whole, as opposed to the individual trusts. And therefore balancing across the different pools of capital within the system is a separate component, an additional component this year. So that was the end of March. End of April, we then reviewed the overall outturn for the year, which I'm delighted to say we managed to achieve a slightly better result than had originally been planned and forecast, and that was enhanced further by some additional bonus funding from the centre. And I would commend Rakesh and the finance team, and also the entire executive, because this is very much a team business in order to deliver this, to achieve this against something which is a £500 million revenue and cost-based business. So to achieve these outcomes is a great outcome. We then had a further meeting in May, which focused on 2 specific areas. First of all was our capital programme for the 2019-20 year, and how we had arrived at the prioritising for that. It's a programme of just under £35 million capital spend, which is funded through a combination of our own internally generated funds as well as loan funding. We also spent quite a lot of time reviewing the sort of financing and governance related matters associated with the integrated care joint venture arrangements that we have, and we'll spend a bit more time, I think, later in the agenda reviewing that here at the board. So I guess that's probably what I want to say, and if there's anything else, Rakesh, that you'd like to top up on.
Thanks very much, Richard, and thanks very much to the I endorse saying thank you to Rakesh and the finance team to not just meet but to exceed our control total last year was a great achievement. But as Aruna has said, well, as soon as the risk has come off the register for doing that, we've got to put it back on again, because clearly we have another year and another control total to meet.
Sorry, Lawrence, can I just just echo what Richard said? It's not just the finance team and me. I think it's an all trust effort actually, and all the execs around this table and their teams have delivered this really.
Of course, that's absolutely right. Aruna, would you like to give us the people and organisational?
Yep.
Thank you.
So I'm going to just try and do it very briefly. On the staff engagement front, I think lots of positive news to share, and I think noticed by the CQC as well. Your voice, your values, freedom to speak up, Guardian. I think, making huge leaps actually forward on that front. I don't know, Lisa, if you'd wanted to say a couple of words on that front. Sorry, I'll chip people in. And
just to say, the real test is in what our patients are saying and what our patients are seeing. So if you have a look on the IPR report, what we're seeing is both in terms of the friends and family test, but also in terms of complaints, that staff attitude is seen now as a positive as a driver, as opposed to we were always seeing that as within the top 10. So it is a lot. We're starting to see those green shoots, and that's probably now for 3 months running we're starting to see that.
That's great. So we also spoke about the Guardian of Safe Working, but I know there's an agenda item, so I won't touch on that. We'll come to that when we get there. From the recruitment and retention front, we're making huge progress again in terms of the nurse recruitment. We've had recruitment days which have been really successful. We've hired a lot of nurses. Is there anything else you want me to add, Arlene, or you're?
We've had a couple of successful recruitment days, and we have 50 new registered nurses starting in September, which I think is the highest we've had for a long time. And we will continue with those days to recruit.
Yep. We did discuss the consultant vacancies, quite a lot of medical consultant vacancies, but I think we're, again, progressing, trying to fill those gaps. I think one of the things that I do want to mention in terms of the impact of recruitment and retention is really the government's pension policy and the impact that that's having on our consultants in particular, and their likelihood to want to work longer hours because they get taxed for this. I mean, do we want to touch on that? Or so we're looking at it from a trust perspective, and we discussed that quite a lot. Patient transport was the other area of recruitment and retention, and I think again from what we heard at the last meeting, we've made a lot of progress and we've covered all the gaps, so that's moving ahead well. Health and well-being, we spoke about the Epsom doctors mess, and there has been a productive meeting, but I'm not sure that we have closed that out yet, Trevor.
No, there's some more work to be done there, and there's actually a junior doctors forum next week because we've got some additional external funding to try and prioritise what we're going to spend funding on.
Yeah, and availability of water was the other point that we touched upon, and I think that's something we need to discuss further at the next pod. And then finally leads me to HR infrastructure and ESR and the importance of that. I don't know if, Debbie, you want to chip in and add a few words there.
Okay, thank you, Aruna. As you know, we have a massive programme around reviewing our electronic staff records, and really this is the catalyst around us enabling productive working within the organisation. It feeds into a number of our other systems like e-rostering and the track recruitment programme. So really that's a key piece of work that we're doing. We're working alongside our colleagues in finance, and that work is really it's really moving ahead with pace.
That's good. I mean, we heard about e-rostering this morning while we were in the ward, and the frustration in terms of, one set of people having one set of records and another set of people having another set of records, and not really knowing what is needed and what needs to be filled. So I think it's really important. Sorry, I have to say this. This is fundamental to the functioning of our HR, of our data, of knowing where we're going. We need to get ESR right. So I think
so, and if I can just say along the e-roster front, Debbie's team is working with the senior nurses to ensure that we get the right establishments and budgets up onto e-roster. I think there's been a delay for several reasons, but the heads of nursing absolutely know what staffing they need, and so I'm encouraging them to support their teams as well with that information.
Absolutely, and we need to get the infrastructure right, the baseline right, which is what I think Debbie's working on in terms of getting ESR up and running. Okay, I think I've covered all the salient.
Thanks very much, Aruna. I think there's some very encouraging progress. It seems to be building up some head of steam now, which is really good. Martin, can you talk to us about EDI? Thank you.
Yes, I'll keep it brief and allow time for any questions. So the strategy we've been working on in the few months that we've been going has been in three parts. The first part has been to make sure that we're compliant, and compliant in this context means that there are requirements, legal requirements for all organisations. There are other legal requirements which apply to all public sector organisations, and some which are specific NHS regulatory. And obviously the whole reason why we're doing this is because it's the right thing to do, but nevertheless there are penalties, unlimited financial penalties, for getting some of this stuff wrong. And we've been working through that. So one example would be that there's still some work to do around the equality impact assessments. So it's a requirement in the public sector that when you put a policy together or a paper, you should have an equality impact assessment. And this is all around the protected characteristics. The second area that we've been focusing on, and Daniel did mention this at the beginning, is we wanted to make sure that we took some tangible, practical action, because in this area, many organisations, it's easy to do stuff which is a bit token, and that's why we made the change in terms of BME representation on panels. Technically, that is still a pilot, but as you heard, some encouraging feedback, and we're tweaking that to improve it further. The third part, and very different emphasis, was really on the positive side of things, and looking especially at inclusion. And it was about celebrating difference and diversity. And there's a whole raft of smaller initiatives around that. Some of it is about making sure that we've got calendars in place which staff participated in to see which events, which days that they wanted to celebrate. And also to set up a number of employee groups, some of which are now been functioning for some time. For instance, the BME network, some are in the earlier stages, LGBT or LGBT++, and also the Disability Network, which is launching this week. The next phase of what, and we've started to do this at the last meeting, the next phase is that it's always more likely to be successful in making change if you make leaders in every level of the organisation accountable for the change. The more that you do things just as a whole trust-wise initiative, the weaker it is. And so what we did was to look at the data which comes from the employee opinion survey, but actually look at that by the different areas. And there's some very powerful questions that are in there. So there's some really solid data available which says things like, have you personally experienced discrimination, etc., in the last 12 months? And in any organisation, some will be more positive than others, and it's about them finding out why some are more positive than others and working on the action plans to do that. And that's our focus now. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Very encouraging and great progress from where we were, let's say, a year ago. So I'm really pleased about that. Good. So that's the IPR. Peter, would you like to take us through the risk register?
So the corporate risk register, I think I was just reviewing the conversation we've just had, and the key risks that are either with good progress that's been made. We've talked about cancers, things coming off the corporate risk register, as well as some of the specific items of equipment that have been purchased in the year have come off the corporate risk register, and others have come on. So we've touched on staffing, very relative care. We've talked briefly at the beginning around, from Aruna's element, around Brexit as well, and the financial risk. So all the core key components of our corporate risk register have been covered off in the work that we've just discussed. The one component which is our first risk on our risk register, is our ability to do everything. Do we have both the resources and the skills to do that? And as the board had discussed in private the last time, is that given that we have actually successfully delivered the mobilisation of community services, even though there's still much more to do, and the increasing capacity at the board level with Chris's appointment, Aruna's appointment, and Thursday's appointment, that we are in a position to sort of slightly de-escalate that risk. So we've tweaked the score, but it still is a material risk to our ability to do everything, so it remains on the corpus register. So that was the only other risk I wanted to highlight that we've not touched on yet, and we'll hear more about community in a moment. And our plan over time is for that to be a more fully integrated conversation, rather than, as we're going to do today, is sort of have a sort of a separate item on that.
Thank you. Anyone have any further points on that? Yes, Pat?
Lawrence, can I just say that because quite a lot of the risks on the corporate risk register do fall within PSQ, we have agreed that we will add an extra half hour to what is already quite a long meeting, but we will ring fence that for risk discussions, certainly for the first several months of taking this on board.
And that's all part of the fact that as we've disbanded Park, there needs to be a specific risk item for all the other committees at the end, and it's probably at least half an hour, if not slightly longer, to discuss the specific risks in those areas, and then they will be clearly owned by the committee and the committee chair. Good. Let's move on then to the trust mortality reporting and peer review. Ruth, thank you.
Thank you. So this report gives the position for Q3, so October, November, December, of 2018, in terms of how we are reviewing the care of patients who die in our trust, and most importantly how we're reflecting and amending our care and service provision as a consequence. To remind you that there has been guidance, national guidance, in terms of how we should review and learn from deaths in place for the last 2 years, and we have a 2-stage review process which has been in place for the duration of that period. You see, in Q3, we were undertaking what we call level 1 reviews in just over 2/3 of patients. That's an early review undertaken by the team who have delivered the care, but were more challenged in performing the more in-depth assessments for those patients. The paper talks quite a lot about some proposed changes in how we undertook mortality reviews, which I'm pleased to report have actually come into place since this paper was drafted. We now have a whole team of reviewers who on a daily basis are reviewing all deaths in the hospital, and are reviewing the care given to, or the cases where there is concern about the care given in a real-time basis. And we're now doing that for over 90% of patients in real time, so very significant progress. I think the important thing to actually look at is what changes those reviews are leading to. And you'll see here that as a consequence of mortality reviews, firstly, in the majority of cases, the care given is of a good quality. But where care is not good, we've been able to actually enhance the care and training in terms of intravenous fluids. We are looking at how we cohort the sickest patients we have in our hospitals together in our AMUs. And actually we have amended our operational pressures policy, taking on board some of the learning that came through from our mortality reviews. So what we're really seeing is the real impact of mortality reviews is allowing us to highlight where we could deliver care in a better way, and we are making changes in a responsive way. It's important to highlight that our hospital mortality rate remains within the expected range, with no significant difference between weekday and weekends. And I think it's also important to note that whereas the mortality review process is new, it builds upon a very strong process for investigating concerns about care through our root cause analysis and serious incident investigation process, which remains strong. And what we've done here within the paper is highlight some of the learning that's come through from cases which were submitted in Q3. And you've already heard that one of the themes we've seen through has come about around the care of dementia and delirium. And we have got a very targeted piece of work that's going on to enhance the care we give to patients with those diagnoses. And other learning really comes through cases from all divisions, which allows us month on month to enhance the care that we're giving to our patients. So that's a summary of the position in terms of mortality reviews. One specific point I wanted to highlight is it is really important that we review the care of patients under our trust with learning disability. And as presented here, we were not doing those in a timely way. However, I'm very pleased to say that since the Learning from Deaths programme began, we've had 17 deaths in patients with learning disability, and now each one of those has been reviewed. And we have got some consolidated learning, which I'm going to share at Hospital Grand Round next week, that pertains to the lessons that have come from those 17 cases, because clearly both nationally and locally there are enhancements we can make to the care of patients with learning disability.
Thank you. Anyone, any comments on that report from Ruth? Thank you. It's very comprehensive, very useful. Would you like to take us through the Never event report, which is essentially a summary of the Never events for last year?
So this report highlights that in the last year, 18-19, the Trust reported 3 Never events, all falling within different categories. I should remind you that the definition of a Never event is nationally stipulated, and there is a national publication looking at how many Never events each trust reports, which comes out on a quarterly basis. The 3 reported pertain to a retained swab after surgery, to the administration of an incorrect group of a blood component, and to an overdose of insulin. I think that we have summarised in very high level the incidents here in the paper, and I think most importantly have clarified that robust investigations have been undertaken into all of those cases, with action plans developed which are actually either closed. In fact, all of those 3 bar 2 actions in relation to the insulin have now been closed off at the Trust SI panel. So I think that we have a robust process for identifying and reporting Never events. We've enacted full duty of candour in relation to these, and have made significant changes which mitigate against the chance of recurrence in relation to each of these 3 cases.
Yes, and it's important just to clarify that none of the patients in these Never events was harmed by them specifically. Is that correct? It is, isn't it? It's what it says.
In two cases, it's an anomaly of the system that perhaps we're describing no harm, never events.
Yes.
But for 2 of the cases, that's exactly what has been described.
Yes.
But because the learning is such that although for those particular patients the incident did not lead to harm, there was system learning which could mitigate against that risk in future cases.
Indeed, indeed. And of course Never events are nationally defined.
Absolutely.
Nationally stipulated. Can you just say how many, over the last sort of 3-4 years, what's our track record on Never events? Has it gone up, down? Where are we at?
It's often the same. And it's interesting looking at the national, we scrutinise the national data quite regularly. There's huge variability. There are some trusts, particularly larger trusts, might report 8 to 10 per year. I think our position is, if one were to benchmark, and it's probably somewhere in the middle in terms of cases per bed. Clearly, we'd love to be in a position where we're reporting none. But what's important is that where things do go wrong, we identify them and we actually carry out the investigations.
Okay, thank you very much. Sandy, would you like to do that? Is Sam joining you?
Sam's here.
Yep, okay. Thank you very much. Over to Sandy for the Guardian and Safe Working report.
Very, very rapidly. You can read the figures yourself. Slightly more exception reports than we had in the same period last year. But that can be put down to e-roster. We have a rota design system that designs the rotas for the junior doctors. When those rotas are changed, the day-to-day working is controlled by e-roster. And this hadn't been updated following a very large review of work schedules in medicine at Epsom, which resulted in the junior doctors having an extra half hour every day in the morning to ensure that their handovers were very well completed and safely completed. And part of that process, the number of middle grade doctors at Epsom in medicine has also been increased on the rota from 9 to 14 to improve safety and health and care again. So the pattern actually, when I look at it in depth, shows that the doctors are now actually reporting when they need time back or money for working the extra hours, which is actually the terms and conditions of their contract. Much more rarely now are we getting reports of immediate safety concerns, and the only area that we've got immediate safety concerns on now is when we haven't got cover at St Helier for what's called the 416 bleep, which is a thing that the junior doctors hate, because basically that bleep goes off about every 90 seconds throughout the shift between 5 and 8 if there isn't a advanced nursing practitioner holding it who has the experience and the knowledge of the hospital. So effectively there's a junior doctor wandering around unable to do anything except answer a phone. But there's many things in place to try and correct that, and unfortunately Arlene stepped out at the moment. She could defend this. Ruth.
What I can say is that we discussed this at the Trust Radar Committee, that's Avoiding Avoidable Death and Harm Committee, on Wednesday. And actually we heard there's been very positive steps in terms of recruitment to post to support 416 bleep. And actually we gained significant assurance about the mitigations in place to make sure that the junior doctors are able to carry on with their clinical work through the evening uninterrupted.
I kind of knew that was going on anyway, thanks Ruth. There's an awful lot of stuff going on about doctors' well-being as part of the junior doctors' care thing. So I'm going to hand over to Sam to talk about the work of the Junior Doctors Forum.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you for the hard work, the feedback after my previous public board meeting where I attended, where we discussed some of the areas that were causing junior doctors at the Epsom site and medicine difficulty. There have been huge improvements and work both from the medical direction there, but also from management to help support the doctors with change to handover process, and also with looking at the rota and staffing there. I'd also like to mention that I have had feedback from the ground about the work that critical care outreach is having. I know it's still in very early days, and I look forward to seeing how that develops in time. Coming on to thinking about the medical well-being, as we are well aware, the facilities at the Epsom site are well below standard. This is something that we from the Junior Doctor Forum have been working with estates and facilities and with HR and workforce for some time before the more recent information we've had. So we'd identified previously that we needed to do work, and we'd had meetings, but then more recently both through the BMA and NHS England have identified a list of standards which is in your information pack about things that the trust, as about 97% of trusts in the UK have signed up to, about a minimum level of standards that we need to facilitate for junior doctors' health and well-being. With this, there's also been an allocation of funds, and this has been sort of decided for a review process as to whether trusts would be getting 30,000 or just over 60,000, depending on need. Through that review process, it was identified that Epsom and Helier would actually need the larger amount of money allocation. So that is a very positive thing. More work needs to be done, and I'll be meeting with Trevor and the Junior Doctor Forum next week to look at where we lie at the moment. Through the LNC and through the local BMA and from the Junior Doctor Forum, we've been doing a mapping exercise looking at what facilities are available at the moment and seeing sort of how far short we're falling of those. So we're aware there's work that needs to be done, but it's all about working together both with the estates and facilities and workforce with the Junior Doctor Forum committee, with some support from the PGMC to make sure that we're on track for moving that to be closer to those standards and hopefully surpassing them depending on where the meetings go. So I don't really have much more to add at the moment, other than that we've got the ring fence money that we'll be then working at how we can use that to help improve things for facilities, mainly at Epsom, but also making sure that some things are still done at St Helier's to continue standards.
Thanks very much, Sam. Trevor, where are we actually at on the doctor's mess, the junior doctor's mess at Epsom?
So I think we've done a lot of work around the linen issues, the cleaning, and I don't believe it's a shared facility now with consultants, so that's improved. We've started work to provide additional on-call stroke rest facilities in Langley Wing, and they should be online the next month. I think the next stage is about some of the improved space around separate space for computer rooms and or computer usage and sort of quiet areas, and improving some of the facilities around the kitchen, sort of tea, coffee and microwave facilities.
Thanks very much. Any other? Dan?
A bit of a left field question, but what popped into my inbox this week was the BMA had reached an agreement with the government about resolving the junior doctors' lack in not agreeing the contract from 2016 with looked like quite a lot of changes and increases in salaries. Is the how is that going to land, do you think, with junior doctors, given that there has to be a vote? Any ideas?
I don't really know if I can speak for junior doctors as a whole overall for the country, but I know that from what I've seen about some of the recommendations, there's lots of things that are very positive, looking at junior doctor health and welfare and looking at the current system actually where things are falling short. There's been a large drive within the last 5 years actually working out what is making junior doctors leave the profession or actually undergo difficulty with their own mental health, and some of the points in there I think address a lot of the issues that they're having. There are a few things that from recommendations of further changes that I think will be quite positive, but there may be some challenges as to how those will be implemented.
Certainly there's basically two groups representing junior doctors. There's the BMA and a separate forum that started because the BMA weren't being effective prior to 2016. From what I've seen in the BMA side of the Twitter sphere, they all seem very pleased with themselves, and from the opposite side, they're less pleased. But actually, I doubt they've even delved into the depths of the report, which I think is an amazing improvement on the previous 2016 contract. Things like rest and travelling home from work and stuff like that is now actually there in black and white.
Thanks very much, Sandy. Thanks very much, Sam. Ruth, 7-day service report.
Thank you. So if I just introduce this, you will be aware that there are 10 core standards which are tabulated in Table 1, which stipulate the standards that all trusts should meet to ensure that clinical care does not vary across the 7 days of the week. That we have previously brought to the board reports of audits that we've undertaken where we self-assess our trust compliance against those standards. But from this point onwards, the national way in which our compliance is to be reported has been changed. So it's been mandated nationally that all trusts are to submit a twice-yearly board assurance framework which self-assesses compliance against the standards. And so the format here is as prescribed. That varies from the previous methodology, which allowed mandated trusts to undertake a very comprehensive notes audit to assess compliance. We've now been given a degree of flexibility about how we undertake that self-assessment. Whereas previously it was stipulated that we had to undertake a set number of notes audits to look at compliance. Now it is for trusts to determine their methodology. The methodology that we've actually agreed in this trust is that we believe undertaking notes audits remains really invaluable. And if I explain, one of the key standards is looking at the number of patients who are reviewed by a consultant within 14 hours of admission. We believe the only way that you can determine that is to actually look at the notes and ascertain that the review took place. There are other trusts that have taken a view that actually if a consultant is job planned to undertake a ward round at a set time, then that counts as being compliant. We have not taken that view. So we have undertaken a notes audit. It was actually undertaken the last week in March. Our clinicians didn't know it was being undertaken that week. It coincided with a week when we were doing Your Voice, Your Values, and so we had a lot of clinicians off-site. However, I'm pleased to be able to report that in terms of the standard of consultant review within 14 hours, our performance has actually increased significantly from last report, and actually we are significantly exceeding the 90% nationally mandated figure, both weekdays and weekends, which is a very strong position to be in. I think the other key messages to take from the audit are that whilst patients who need daily consultant review or twice daily review are generally getting that in the week, the same is not true at weekends when we have less consultant hours available for patient care. And that is something which is particularly a challenge within the medical specialties. We have recently relaunched a 7-day services steering group, which all divisions are represented at. It's being chaired by Jim Stevenson, one of the AMDs. And medicine are currently reviewing how they can ensure that patients who require that weekend review are actually having a review undertaken. That is the first task that we have given them, to make sure we're using the consultant resource we've got optimally at weekends. The other finding, because there's a lot of information in here that I really wanted to highlight, is the gap that we have, which is mirrored in a lot of trusts, in terms of availability of echocardiogram at weekends. So if a patient needs an unscheduled echocardiogram at the weekend, currently we do not have provision for that to always be done on site, and the patient may need to be transferred to the tertiary unit, which will be St George's. That is not uncommon. In fact, it is actually the norm in many district hospitals. And I think this is an area where, and the way that we have worked across the sector to look at how we can deliver interventional radiology across a network, we could do the same for echocardiogram, because technology is now such that a technician could place the probe on a patient's chest and it could be interpreted remotely if we could get together a sector-wide rota. So this is something we'll be taking up for further discussion, because my understanding is that we are not unique in having this challenge, and I think we've got a strong acute provider collaborative, and this really is something we should be taking forward as a key finding from this report. So I think the key messages would be that we're doing very well with immediate consultant review within 14 hours, which we were not always historically, so that really does afford an enhancement to patient care. But we are challenged with consultant reviews in medicine for all patients at weekends, and in the provision of echocardiography at weekends. Happy to take questions.
Yes, I mean, it's very interesting, the idea of a technician doing a echocardiogram and it being interpreted somewhere else, which could be St George's or somewhere else. What would be the practical barriers to sorting that out, to doing that? What are the issues?
I don't think we yet know. So I think there'll be some IT infrastructure requirement, as there was when our radiologists started reporting films from home. You know, our radiologists, if you go back 10 years, would actually have to be on site to report a CT scan, and now they can log on and report from home. So there are some infrastructure changes that will be required. And then there'll be, there's clearly a need for the trust within the sector to agree this is an appropriate project to take forward, and to agree to pool resources to allow a 7-day provision of cover, so that someone is interpreting those scans.
To what extent are we behind other hospitals in our development of technology or use of technology for that remote access?
I don't think we are, in that this has been raised. I was on the national steering group for 7-day services, and this has come through as a theme from almost everywhere nationally. And I'm not aware of any region that has got a system in place such as I've kind of hypothecated could be put in place. But because it is one of the key themes that's coming through nationally, I think we might find there is national support in helping us develop a framework for this, which will be very helpful, particularly in terms of the IT infrastructure.
I was just going to ask Ruth, how many patients on average over a weekend would we be would need to have an ECG? And are we currently? Sorry, it's
So,
Echo
the
cardio.
echo.
Okay. And are we currently putting them in a blue light ambulance to take them?
If we needed to, I think the important thing to state is there are it's small numbers that really need an urgent echocardiogram over a weekend where you could not have predicted the requirement for that on a Friday. So it is small numbers, and you may say that actually if the patient deteriorated to an extent that they needed that echo, they may actually well need transfer anyway to the tertiary unit. However, I have a sense that if the service were available, there'd be a greater demand than we currently have. So the question I can't answer is what is the real demand for echo at weekends? But I can say at the moment we have not had this raised as a clinical risk. I've not seen any clinical incidents related to it. What it is doing, I think, is adding to length of stay and giving a less good patient experience rather than actually having a direct adverse clinical effect for our patients.
Can I just make a couple of comments? I think the main barrier at the moment is actually having the skilled workforce present on this site who have the technical capacity to perform an echocardiogram. It's an ultrasound machine, a scan of the heart, and it needs people who are very well trained to do that. There's a separate issue as to whether you need a cardiologist to interpret that result. The echo technicians are highly trained and able to provide a report that is clinically useful for clinicians on the ground. So I think the number of scans that would need to be sent remotely to a tertiary centre would be extremely small in terms of supporting the immediate management of patients. We do have the ability to perform what's called a limited echo, where some clinicians who are partially trained to look at the key findings of an echocardiogram rather than the more subtle findings are available, particularly on the intensive care unit. So if patients are very sick or our consultant intensivists are called for an urgent issue that patients might benefit from a focused echocardiogram, that can be performed, but we clearly need to look at how we can provide something that is more responsive to patients with more common issues that might speed up their decision making through their admission at weekends.
Thank you, Chris.
Sorry, so if we're not doing echocardiograms over the weekend, that one could imagine that leads to a bit of a build-up for Mondays. So is there capacity on Mondays to do, you can imagine holding a patient, yes, it'd be good to have them on Sunday, but we can get by waiting till Monday. Will they be able to, is there enough capacity to ensure that they then get the echo on the Monday, or does it cause a log jam which sort of flows through the week?
I think that's probably one for me to take. So at the moment, we're not picking up any indications that we're not meeting our internal turnaround for inpatients, which is 24 hours within the request for test. So I realise that doesn't answer your question specifically, but we're not picking up anything for echocardiograms that's not indicating that.
Sir?
What I probably would say is that throughout lots of different trusts, this is a very common theme throughout the country. Part of the things that are difficult for Ruth and for Dan to give answers to is when we're working in the system, if something's not available, it will actually affect our management decisions. So if we know that we can't order an echo routinely this one over the weekend, we wouldn't be ordering it. So we're not going to pick up actually, that's something that will be left for the team on Monday to then order. So it's probably a bit more difficult to know actually how that will affect our backlog, because actually those tests may not be ordered until later because we'll be focusing on urgent and immediate care and using facilities that are available.
Thank you, Ruth. Very useful, and I think it raises a number of issues, which the way that the systems are coming together now, at national level, at London level, these are exactly the sort of things I think that the NHS at the top level are trying to sort out, so that these sort of collaborations or potential collaborations can be put in place quite quickly to give a better service to patients and really use the benefits of technology. You know, as Ruth was saying, 10 years ago, we were a long way away, and now, you know, with radiologists being able to look at things on their home computer screen, it's a big advance, but there's a lot more that can be done, I think. Right, let's move on to community services and governance arrangement. Thurza.
So as the Trust Board is aware, since April, Epsom St Helier has been contractually responsible for, and the CQC registered organisation for, the adult community services contract for Surrey Downs and for NHS community services, adults and children and sexual health services in Sutton. In both of those places, the arrangement is enacted through a contractual joint venture with other partners through Surrey Downs Health and Care and through Sutton Health and Care respectively. In March of this year, the board received a paper which set out the mobilisation risks in relation to the contracts that we were about to enter into, and the longer term strategic risks, with an indication of how those would be managed in its first year. The board noted the mobilisation and the strategic risks, and also particularly the integrated governance arrangements for both of the partnership boards. And you confirmed that you would be assured in relation to the community services through the existing board governance and committee arrangements. What I've done here is to bring back more detail, as agreed in June, to set out in more detail the governance structure for the partnership boards, to set out the integrated risk register, which I'll update upon, and the first integrated performance report that we have. So if I turn first to the integrated governance arrangements, if I could just apologise to people like me who have paper copies of this, you only have the Surrey Downs integrated governance arrangements in your paper copies. There is a separate one for Sutton, but I'll talk about the differences. So in Appendix 1, we've set out the integrated governance arrangements for both of the contracts that are held. It is important to note that to enact the requirements of all of the partners, so all of the partners in both health and care partnerships have a responsibility for the community services contracts, not just Epsom St Helier. And Epsom St Helier holds the other partners to account through the partnership board. So the integrated governance is actually really critical. And the governance arrangements that we have in place, although they will look the same to the board, through the board committee, the assurance that the board should seek and look for is that they have been adopted and signed off and agreed by all of the partners before coming into the committee structure of Epsom St Helier. So there is an assurance governance that will sit below the partnership boards for both of the two partnerships, through the partnership board, and then on into the Epsom St Helier board as the CQC registered organisation, but also to the partnership boards of all of the other partners, because they have a responsibility in the same way that Epsom St Helier does. So everyone needs to hold everyone to account through this. So the only difference that there is between the Surrey Downs governance structure and the Sutton governance structure is that in the Sutton governance structure, we have agreed with the London Borough of Sutton an integrated governance for children's services, because London Borough of Sutton manage some of and provide some of the children's services, and Epsom St Helier provides some of the children's services, and that management arrangement is completely integrated and the governance structure is completely integrated, and then reports to the Sutton Health and Care Board. And in Surrey Downs, the GP federations have a particular role in relation to the provision of the district nursing and community nursing services, and they are part of the governance. That is the governance that was agreed by the board, and we will now start reporting through the committee structure, but the committee structure should always ask that the partnership boards, what we're reporting has been assured by the partnership boards before coming into the committee structure. The second part of what we have in the paper is the integrated risk register. So as I say, the board in March adopted the mobilisation risks for the community contracts and the strategic risks In May of this year, the partnership boards for Surrey Downs and Sutton reviewed the risks that we had inherited from the two exiting organisations. So that's RMH, Royal Marsden for Sutton, and CSH, Surrey for Surrey Downs. The partnership boards formally agreed the closure of some of those risks and the adoption of other risks. These risks have been collated together and included with the identified transition risks that we have. So we've moved from mobilisation to transition, and the operational delivery risks collated into the appropriate data risk registers and reviewed and assured through the governance structures of the two partnership boards. So I have included in this paper all of those risks. The board would not expect to see every single risk any more than it would with any other division of the trust moving forward, but I thought it was quite important that at this meeting the board saw all of the risks that have been identified so that they had an absolute clear view of all of the risks that have been managed across the whole of the two places. In future we will report in exactly the same way as any other division of the trust would report through the committee structure and moving forwards with the corporate risk register. It's been pointed out to us that that we have more work to do in ensuring that we are consistent with the scoring of our risks versus the scoring of risks by other divisions. But actually what was much more important for this risk register is that the people on the ground and the partners own the risk than what the score was. So I'm confident that these are the highest rated risks. They might change their rating, but these are the ones that people are most worried about. And if the board went and spoke to anyone outside or to any of the partners, they would identify the same risks. So you have the risk registers there. You can pick up any detail in terms of ones where the risks have changed from the time that the board saw the risks in March to where they are now, or ones where we think that they are new risks that have emerged that we didn't expect to be there. And then the third element of the report is the integrated performance report. So the following structure is proposed, that we will follow exactly the same template and the same domains as for the rest of Epsom and Helier, that we, over time we'll incorporate the community metrics into the report, but for now we will show them separately so that you can see what is happening with community. Similarly, we will show Surrey Downs and Sutton separately so you can see what is happening in each of the two places. The focus will be on the core metrics for the particular groups, and that we will present that in exactly the same way. There is much more work to do in terms of the integrated performance report at all levels, and in terms of the data that we are receiving at all levels. In the Surrey Downs area, we have received a very comprehensive report which will go through our partnership board. So picking up the item that was raised earlier, yes, we did know about the waiting list for physiotherapy because we have received the report for April that tells us the waiting lists across every single service and which are the ones that we should worry about. There is more work to do in the Sutton area just to understand more the activity and the metrics there. I suppose all I would say in summary is that we are working very hard to ensure two things happen in tandem, and they are both very important. One is that this board feels assured that the community is being managed appropriately and safely, and to do that we are linking with every structure that there is within Epsom and Helier, but also that we can provide to this board, but also to our partner organisations, that the ownership of the delivery of the services rests across the partners and doesn't just rest with one partner. So those are the two things that we are looking for in terms of what we are aiming to do. It is very early days, but we did assure the board that the risks that we would have for Q1 we'd expect to be closed down in Q1. We now need to review which of those risks we have not managed to close down, and therefore we are taking forward.
Thank you very much, Thursday. Very comprehensive. Chris, would you like to comment on that? And clearly it seems to me that we should add the community to the IPR, and that each board you should give a summary of where we are. I mean, if you're all right with that, I'm sure you are. But would you like just to comment on that from your point of view?
So thank you. I mean, I think it may sound defensive, but of course this is a new type of organisation, particularly the fact that it's an alliance of a variety of providers will give it a sort of an extra twist to it, and also particularly Surrey Downs area, the more complex stakeholder picture that there is compared to the Sutton end, which is a more straightforward one, because more people are involved. And it's really just to reflect on that it will probably seem, not the governance structure, but the way it gets explained a little bit messier than the trust pure and simple, simply because of the large number of people involved in it. But we will work our way, and hopefully it will be clear and coherent over the following months. And I would like to thank Thurza for the huge amount of work she's put in to try and create order out of not chaos, but a disparate number of jigsaw pieces.
Aruna, then Martin.
So yeah, so just to get a flavour, I'm looking through the risk register and just to get a flavour of kind of what keeps you up at night, perhaps. I look at the risk that's at 20 on the Sutton one, and it's about the complexities of providing specialist medicines management advice, community services as an acute trust compounded by no community pharmacists. Could you give us a flavour? I mean, I'm just trying to get a sense of what is it. That is so hot.
Yes, I shudder at the idea of the question about what keeps me awake at night. But this would certainly be one where, when we raised it with the people on the ground, this was one that worried them considerably. So the provision of medicines management in the community is actually quite different from the provision of medicines management in acute. You're providing the medicines management in people's homes. That takes a level of expertise and understanding of how that is, how you deliver that safely and appropriately. And we did not inherit any community pharmacists when we moved into the new contract, so we lost that expertise, and we didn't have that expertise within the acute trust. So that put us at risk. We're now managing that risk down because one of our directors actually is a pharmacist by background. She is taking on the full responsibility for medicines management within the community, and which includes our community hospitals. That makes it much safer. Hopefully those arrangements will be in place within the next week or so, and then we will have the expertise and the competency to be assured that what we're doing is absolutely right. So it's more a worry about the difference of provision in people's homes.
Your next question is going to be, so why did we not know about that? But in the joy of how the NHS when it's doing competition and you bid for a contract and then you win it, so you get a 2P list of all the people you're going to receive. However, particularly in the community services, many people do multiple jobs. And so we didn't actually get the full 2P list of all the people who were coming over in both the contracts until the middle of March. And then you discover that the pharmacists in the Marsden decided to stay in the Marsden rather than come to us. And we've got a few little niche services that are like that, which we're now in the process of ensuring that we do actually have the right people.
So, sorry, Mike.
Sure.
I did just have one quick follow-up. The other 20 that we have is on the IT and of course, which I think is understandable, but the inclusion of other providers, Kingston, for instance, is that also in hand and being progressed? This is on Surrey Downs, I believe. Oh no, sorry, is it? Yes.
Yes. So that relates less to Kingston. It relates to diabetes service.
Okay.
So there are a number of elements to the diabetes service that did TUPE from Kingston. One was that we inherited a waiting list because patients hadn't been seen. We inherited the service but without the staff because staff didn't TUPE. Both of those were risks that we'd identified in March and were managing, but still continue to manage. New risks that have emerged have been that we have also found from receiving the database a number of patients where we just need to ensure that this is poor caseload management, that this is just a database that hasn't been cleaned appropriately rather than patients. So we're going through that process at the moment.
So how are the staff who are TUPID over feeling, and what have we done or plan to do in terms of understanding what concerns and issues they might have?
So if I take both places separately, because they're quite different. So in Sutton, where all of the staff did TUPE over to Epsom and St Helier, the TUPE went well. They feel that they have been well supported by the corporate services. That when they've had a problem, they feel that that's been addressed. That they feel that they've not lost anything by coming over into Epsom and St Helier. They are very keen to progress with what does it mean not to be part of Epsom St Helier, but what does it mean to be part of Sutton Health and Care. So their expectation is what should we do across the partnership to look at what does it mean to be working in this partnership way and transforming services in a partnership way. And that is the big focus of attention that we have over the next few months in the Sutton area. In the Surrey Downs area, only a small number of staff TUPEd over to Epsom St Helier. The majority of staff remained employed by CSH as the community provider and were seconded to different partners within the organisation. We are much further progressed in the Surrey Downs area in terms of what does it mean to be part of Surrey Downs Health and Care. We've had a very energising launch event. The primary care networks are working very hard in terms of what does it mean that's different at the local level. And the part that we're working on now is how do we make sure that the systems in the background, when people are employed by different people and managed by different people, actually support the provision of care. But why we are working together in a partnership is much further advanced in Surrey Downs than it is in Sutton. So it's almost the two flip sides of how people view the system.
Can you just say a little bit more about how we're finding out what their feelings and concerns are and anything we're planning to do?
Yes, certainly. So there are regular meetings that are set up with the managers across the two areas. We have people going out and visiting on a regular basis. So Daniel has been out and visited a number of the staff bases. I've been out and visited the bases. We're working to look at how we could do some form of survey monkey that actually looked at a number of things. How are people feeling now, so that we have a measure of what that means moving forward, but actually what does it mean to you, so to be part of this partnership arrangement, what are your expectations? We've started what we are calling communities of engagement in both of the two areas, where we want this to feel more like a co-owned way of working than feeling like an employer-employee relationship. We've asked for people to come forward to be part of that, to generate what we do moving forward, and we've had a good response to that. We're looking at, with the communities of engagement, how we link that in, so it's not just about the staff, but we include our lay partners in that, so that they're part of it as well. So I think that those are the things that we're doing.
Great, thanks.
Thank you very much. Sorry,
Can I just
Lisa,
add
yes.
to support the work that Thurs has been doing with, from a local level, we've been doing a lot of work in terms of the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian. So we tie in with the local, both areas in terms of the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian. So anything we will see will be reported back through that route too. And of course there's the staff FFT and the patient FFT that we've been working very closely with the teams on too. So the board will get some oversight of that through that area too.
And in my weekly message today, we're launching our 5-minute cultural survey, which includes the staff FFT, but then asks a whole heap of follow-up questions from the respect. And it asks, where do you work? Where one of the answers is Surrey Downs and one is Sutton Health and Care. So we should be able to find out specifically from the people who we employ in those areas what they think, as opposed to the people who are seconded where we need something different.
Good, thanks very much. We're a bit behind time, and because we have this sort of rather hard finish today, I'm going to ask the next few items to be taken as swiftly as they can be, but obviously giving them the attention they deserve. So Daniel, Sutton Health and Care.
So I think we can do this in 1 minute.
Oh.
So this is here mostly for information, but it's very important. So there is a big drive to join up both commissioning and provision in the NHS and between local authority and the NHS. And the place of Sutton is doing a pretty good job of pulling it all together into a plan. Croydon have been pretty public about what they are doing and already are now advertising for a joint chief exec between the hospital and the place of Sutton, the place of Croydon and the council in Croydon. Sutton are not far behind, and this paper is going to the Health and Wellbeing Board in Sutton on the 24th, Monday the 24th of June, where it will be debated hugely. But we agreed that all the partners would put it in their public board meetings because actually there's a huge amount in it. But so I think we haven't got time for a conversation about it today, but we should do at a later date because there's loads of good stuff in it.
So, just very quickly, what are the routes, if you like, the committees and the approvals and so on that have to be gone through until it is done?
So in the end, the decision-making body on this document is the Council's Health and Wellbeing Board, which is chaired by the leader of Sutton Council. So on the 24th, it will essentially get endorsed at that. I can't see anyone objecting to it because we've spent an awful lot of time between all the partners creating it. There's a pretty impressive table at the end, which is a timeline of how Sutton is expected to develop. In this year, there are some significant bullet points in it, which include the aim that Sutton Health and Care, which is the provider vehicle that we are creating in Sutton, will take on more responsibilities in the autumn, including for continuing healthcare and palliative healthcare. That's two quite big steps in actually joining together quite a lot of providers and commissioning of that's quite disparate and complicated to try and make something much better for patients in both those areas.
Thank you. We'll watch this with great interest. Sorry, Chris. Yes.
Sorry, just that very last point of Daniel's there. I think that those continuing healthcare and palliative care are two very vulnerable groups of patients. Where actually joining that up, we should give a lot of benefit for those groups.
Thank you. Thank you. Peter, would you like to take us through the Frontline Well-Led Action Plan summary? Thank you.
Thank you. So we've alluded to this report and work several times through the course of this morning's board. So I'll just provide a little bit of context for those who are perhaps less familiar with it. So we commissioned a external partner to do what's called a well-led review. This is in line with national guidance to make sure that we don't fall into groupthink and think we're all great. So we appointed a partner competitively for that. They used the same framework that the CQC use in their well-led assessment with what they call key lines of inquiry. So these are 8 domains that they focus on around leadership and governance of the organisation. So the board has discussed the recommendations from the partnership who did the work for us at a number of seminars over time. What they've come up with is 10 broad themes of recommendations. I'm not going to go through all 10, but to say that they're probably broadly in kind of 2 categories. One is around kind of structural things that we can do and need to do. So one of those is around changing our board subcommittee arrangements. So that's the disbanding of the Performance Assurance and Risk Committee and moving that work into the other committees and bringing that risk conversation up to the board. The other element in that same space is to say about how we were doing public briefings, public board and more time for board seminars. So we are going to be changing the way in which we conduct the public briefings by moving them in time away out of the same time zone as the public board, so that, and I'll invite Lisa to say something about that in a moment, but it's around making sure that we're doing the right thing in the public board session, and I'll be interested to hear how colleagues feel that this morning has been their first step at that. So those are sort of some of the structural things. The other structural arrangement was changing reporting lines for some execs, so that Debbie is now at the board as Director of People in her own right, accountable to Daniel, and I've picked up some other external working in its place. There is more work we need to do, which we've touched on, around how we both present the information around performance, both at the subcommittees and at board, and we've touched on that already. The other broad group of actions are around some of the softer things that we do, both around leadership development, our own development as a board, succession planning, and those sorts of things, and perhaps ask Debbie to say one or two things around there once we get beyond the kind of the high-level structure of it. So basically, there are 10 broad recommendations which the board has reviewed. We're basically saying we should agree to all of those. We've made a start on putting some of those actions already in place, and there is a timeline in the detailed action plan, which we're proposing is both reviewed in part through the People and Organisational Development Committee, but there are some things, because it's about the board, need to be done at board level and reviewed and assured at board level, so we're bringing that back quarterly. So in terms of our task this morning, it's both to assure ourselves that these are the right actions, and then to approve the action plan, and then the final step of things to do is then to share all of that with our regulator for them to both, as part of their own assurance, as well as if there are elements of good practice that they might then share with others when they collate lessons. So that's the kind of the overview. Lisa, I would say something around the public briefing arrangements that we're proposing to change.
So the plan is to hold our first public briefing meeting in September, towards the end of September. We're looking at a date currently, but also to talk to, and we've started conversations with some of our partners, but also speak to members of the public who are on our lists and who regularly attend either our boards or some of our other meetings, to find out what topics they would like to hear about, so that we can actually frame the conversation and the meeting to their agenda rather than us to our agenda. So that the aim of that is to take place at the end of September.
So our plan is to have quarterly public briefings. So part of the logic around potentially doing that at different locations and at different times is to reach out to others who maybe can't make these sessions in the past. The other linked element to that is also around the way we manage questions. So in line with what many other NHS organisations do, we're now having those submitted in writing in advance, rather than in a sort of a less structured way in the meetings itself. But we will continue to have questions at the public board, but in that written submissions way. So those are the kind of the more public-facing elements of that. Debbie, do you want to say anything in headline around the more sort of OD components?
Okay, in terms of thinking about the change in form of the organisation, as well as our own development as a board, we will be developing an OD strategy that will take account of our changes, and that will feed into the overarching trust strategy, clinical strategy. The new interim people plan has been published as well, and that will give us a framework for which we can work through and support that piece of work. We've also linked into that will be our leadership and development plan, and that again looks at our structure, looks at what we're doing in terms of our divisional leadership, and will flow from that. I don't know if there's anything else to add.
So I guess it's one of the themes that comes through is around how the time we spend as a board focusing on cultural and people issues and making sure that has the right focus of our time. So I think that's probably something that we will need to continue to reflect on, to say, well, are we having the right conversations at the board table around, and we've touched on that today around people and culture, but we can need to, I think, continue to work at that. So that if others have any questions or observations, then it's really for the board to approve the action plan, which we'll then take forward with ourselves and with our regulator.
Right, are there any further comments or questions for Peter? In which case, I'll ask us to approve the action plan. Thank you very much. So that's done. Thank you very much, Peter. Let's move on to Elizabeth. Summary Audit Committee report. We don't need to do the quality bit again, but just the money bit.
Well, two bits of the money bit. KPMG, our external auditors, have to give us an opinion on our financial statements, which I think most people understand how that conclusion is reached, and I'm very pleased to say that we will be receiving a clean audit opinion on that. I think everybody by now around this table, and probably with members of the public who attend, are familiar with the frustrations that we have around the value for money audit, which is the other financial opinion which KPMG have to give us. Despite the fact that we have exceeded our control total by a whopping great £10.8 million, we have still failed what are called the Sustainable Resource Deployment criteria, which are the criteria which are set by HM Treasury, and therefore we have no option but to accept an adverse value for money conclusion in our value for money audit. Hugely disappointing, but the very, very, very important thing is that we have exceeded our control total by 10.8 million, and that we've discussed earlier today. The other important document which was discussed at Audit Committee was the internal audit report for the year, and we have received a satisfactory conclusion on that. And as I think you also know, we place a considerable reliance on the work of internal audit. And so, Lawrence, I have asked that we have an audit committee which is dedicated to looking in depth at the internal audit work which has been carried out. We appointed new internal auditors just over a year ago, and so it is appropriate at this point in their maturity of their knowledge of us that we ask them to give us some very detailed feedback. And we're going to be having that meeting in a couple of weeks' time, aren't we, Rakesh? And I'm looking forward very much to hearing what they have to say when they have got a dedicated meeting to talk to us about it. And of course, I'm happy to take any questions because, as you know, my excitement about talking to audit is limitless.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I would like to thank you very much for all the work you do on Audit Committee and the detailed discussions that you and your team held with KPMG. It was a lot of work. Of course, the opinion that KPMG comes to is largely defined by external rules and rules from HM Treasury, and we're certainly not the only trust to be in that position. What I take particular assurance from is the fact that in terms of the way we manage and spend our money, we have got a completely clean audit report, and that can give everyone confidence that we are very appropriate guardians of the public purse and public well-being in those terms. So that's very good. Has anyone got any further points on the audit? That will obviously all be published in our annual report, won't it? Do you want to just say a bit about that?
The annual report is in its final stages at the moment, and I know that Lisa has a comms plan for that piece of work as well. And it's fascinating to read it, because you forget just how much work has happened in the past year. It's such a great reminder to us all.
Thanks very much. So, contracts over 50,000, Rakesh? I think everyone's seen these. Anyone have any comments on any of these? They all seem to me fairly straightforward to me. Okay, and then the trust seal is being let out again, and there's 3 times, I think, Trevor.
Yeah, two of them, I think, Arling reports on the other one. So we used the trust seal just to complete the lease for Greenway Lane, and that's about 55% of the space for providing our services under Sutton Health and Care. That was the actual lease was agreed through the trust board, and then the other use of the seal was around the construction contract with Porter Cabin for the new office modular building at Epsom, again previously approved by the trust board. And then Arlene has one which was used of the trust seal for the mortuary contract.
Yeah.
Which looks like there's an ovation.
No, yeah, from London Borough Sutton to Kingston.
Right. Is everyone happy with all of those? Good, thank you. Does anyone have any other business? In which case, thank you very much. That's the end of the public board meeting. We're now going to go on to the written questions submitted in advance from members of the public, and I have them here. There are 4 of them: Nigel, Bob, Bess and Linda. I'll take them in this order. I'll read them out, or at least I'll read parts of them out. Nigel's point is basically about preparation for Brexit and acute medical supplies. Nigel learnt that the government needs 6 to 8 months to prepare for the arrangements for acute medical supplies post a hard Brexit. And what's our response? And that's Dan, I think.
So I think there's a difference between what the government needs and what we require as a trust. We've been given very clear instructions about the preparations that we're required to make, and we've put those pressures into action. In terms of medical supplies, we know that we have been told to hold no more than 14 days worth of stocks. The wholesalers will hold a further 6 weeks, and the suppliers and manufacturers will hold a further 3 months behind that, so that we know that that system is in place and it is relatively robust. So we've taken the actions that we are able to within our own control. There are also a couple of other local arrangements. We know that, there is now a local deal across South West London and North Surrey, so that if one trust runs out for a particular drug, we will have an arrangement where we will supply each other. Unfortunately, at the moment, that is, although the right thing to do, it is illegal under the supply of drugs regulations, and we're waiting for a letter of comfort from the government that says that if we do the thing that's obviously sensible, they will not prosecute us. In terms of where we run out of drugs, at the moment there are around 200 individual lines of drugs that we don't have today. We have routine processes in place to manage that, so alternate drugs, different sources of supply, substitution. So at the moment we're managing that. So a shortfall in drugs may not necessarily be attributable to Brexit. It may just be part of the routine ebb and flow of pharmaceutical supply.
Anyone, any other questions on that, or are there any other Brexit issues that we're preparing for?
The 4 key main areas are staffing, pharmaceutical supply, the security of our contracts, and whether there's any financial issues. I won't go into the detail of each of those 4, but at the moment we are assured around our suppliers. We're seeing no major staffing impact, and at the moment there's not been any major financial impact either. We will have to ramp up our planning again once we know what the end of September and October starts to look like, but we've got that in hand.
Thank you. The next question is from Bob, and I won't read it all out because it's quite long, but it's all about the ability of the trust to publish documents enough in advance so that Bob and others can read them and think about them and then ask sensible questions, basically. So I think that Peter is probably in the best place to answer this one.
So this week we've had some particular challenges over some of our technology being able to get all the papers ready in time. So there's been a sort of it's not been quite ideal this week, but the normal plan is that all our papers are published on the Monday before the board, and that we are asking for questions to be submitted by the Wednesday, which then gives us some time to prepare the answers that we will then read out on the Friday board. For those who are not able to attend, and this is part of one of the things about having written questions, it may well be allow for those to submit questions even though they don't have to be here to make their questions. So we will then put the answers up that we've used both on the video version by the Tuesday after the board. We will also produce a written summary of what was said as the answer, and that will also go up on our website. So all the information will be available on a website. So in summary, it's papers out on the Monday, questions by the Wednesday, we'll answer them in the public board on the Friday, and then they will be available on our website by the following Tuesday. That will be our aspiration going forward.
Thank you. That sounds sensible and doable. The issues this week, were they about they were technological IT failures?
So we've had some challenges with our internal file storage, which we had to then we brought in an alternative that took longer to get up and running than we'd planned, and then there was some teething issues with, which meant that where the papers are stored for then to be uploaded or shared or other things weren't as available as they should have been. So I know that not just the corporate governance team, but many in the trust have suffered from kind of not a great IT service over the last week or so, but those have now been fixed and the new platform is up and running, and had nothing to do with the challenges this morning.
Thank you.
The whiteboards.
Okay, that's not satisfactory, is it? The people on the floor don't know what was actually said, or when was this published, please? When were the documents published?
So this week, all of the board papers were available on Tuesday.
Nonsense. Absolute nonsense.
So
I'm sorry.
That's when they were available online.
Thursday on the net. Okay? And that is dishonest to say it, right? To say what you said. Unless my computer is completely nonsensical.
So I think Bob is right. So I discovered that the process that we had where your team asked the comms team to upload the papers didn't work, and now what we have to do is train your team on how to upload the papers, because we had where your team thought they'd done it, the comms team hadn't done it. So Bob is right, and we need to fess up.
And just from a board member's perspective, I don't know whether others had the same issue. When I was travelling through most this week, so as I boarded my plane in the Middle East yesterday, I had the private board papers, but there were no public board papers. So the first I saw of the public board papers on BoardPad was when I arrived back yesterday evening.
So we need to look at that. We're clearly, between us and the admin control system, we need to work at understanding precisely what those challenges are to make that better. But the part of, in response to Bob's point, is the part of why I was talking about what the process will be, is to precisely learn the lessons and some of the challenges this week, so that the process will be that going forward. So Bob, I'm sorry that you didn't get the papers in the time that we've talked about, but we will try our best. That's the process I've outlined.
So I think that what we have is that this time there was a failure, and Daniel has acknowledged that, but in the future we will endeavour to get the papers up on the Monday before the Friday.
Can I suggest that if you don't, you do allow public questions on the day? If we haven't had a chance to see the papers, as we haven't, it seems unfair, and I would ask you as a board, I know I'm not allowed a question now, but please would you reconsider. Other trusts do still allow public questions, and it is, in a year when you're looking towards a public consultation on the hospitals, you talk about a freedom to speak up guardian, but you're not going to let the public spontaneously speak to you.
I will miss the opportunity. I do actually find it constructive.
So I think you'll find that most trusts now don't let people ask questions from the floor. I think that the reason why we're going to have the public briefings quarterly and put them at times a day where more people could come by not doing it on a Friday morning, I think will provide a huge opportunity for that free-flowing conversation to happen.
Free-flowing, if we have to write a letter 2 days in advance.
Yeah, but on the public briefings, that's not how it works. So, and we're going to make them at a more accessible time of the day and longer. So we think that that'll be a better solution than trying to cram it all in right at the end of the public board meetings. And as you can see, just look how many topics we have got through today that of things that we wouldn't normally have put in the public board, because we wanted to put more things that we're talking about so you can hear it. But that means we've got to spend less time on the time that essentially we used to spend having a fruitless argument about the future of Epsom and St Helier, when it isn't, as you know, going to be Epsom and St Helier that leads the consultation. It will be the CCGs. So that's the place to have the conversation.
I think that where we're at is we've had an external review in accordance with the requirement to have an external review. That has made recommendations. We're implementing the recommendations as we have to and as we should. We will see how it goes. If it all works out fine, we get the papers out early so that people can read them and decide what questions to ask and submit them. That will be good. We will have the new style public briefings, which will be a much more of an open opportunity to have, if you like, the discussions that we have had. And I think we have to give it a few months just to see how it beds down. And then, obviously, if it's not working to your satisfaction, to our satisfaction, then we can review it then. So that's where we're at the moment. So the next question is...
Can I make a suggestion?
You can, Bob.
Yeah, because I wrote 3 questions, and you'll say it's all about the same thing.
Well, it sort of is.
Maybe it isn't. But actually, I intended to come with 20 copies of what I had written and put it on the table with these on the chairs, so that the people that are sitting out here actually know what has been asked.
So, Bob, we will publish the list of questions once on the. We can do that in advance.
After the event, though.
No, we can.
Before the event. Yeah. The idea is.
For you gentlemen, really, and I was going to ask the boss man's resignation. You know, this.
Yeah, well, he's not going to do that.
No, sorry. You went into this. You asked. You gave a month's notice of asking these questions. I think it was nearly a month's notice. Okay, I left it until Tuesday night before I wrote anything, and I had not seen anything, right? I was up at midnight doing this damn thing, and I think the public deserve a little bit.
Well, I think we've acknowledged, Bob, that there were problems this week getting the information up. And, we will do our very, very, very best to ensure that we keep to the timetable that we have outlined. And just so you're aware, if it wasn't clear, that all the questions from the public will also be made available to the public before the meeting. So everyone should be in a position to understand, to have the papers, to have been able to read them, to ask their questions, and to read all the questions that other people are asking. I'm going to move on now because we're going to have to go, but there are 2 more questions. One is from Bess, who isn't here, so in a way this is quite useful because this gives an opportunity for people who aren't here to ask a question. And her question is about the public using the staff shuttle bus. So Trevor, can you just enlighten us on that one?
Okay, so so the Trust has managed to have licences from the TfL and Surrey County Council to run its shuttle bus service for use for
public, so for patients and public going between Epsom and Helier Hospital. The shuttle bus service, we provide this information to Beth and on the website, but the shuttle bus service runs from St Helier to Epsom and back. It also stops at the Tesco's on the 217 and Sutton Hospital and outside East Street, sort of near the Rainbow Leisure Centre. Roughly it runs every 35 minutes. There's some tweaking around peak sort of rush hour times, but it is published on the Trust website and also on the londonbussesroute.net. In terms of cost, it costs £1.50 for the public to use that for journey and 75p for children. It's free for Freedom Pass holders after 9:30, and the actual buses take cash and card.
And about 150 people a month are currently using it.
Okay. Right, so that's the answer to that one. The final question from Linda, which is, I'll read it out. Why don't doctors take notice and listen to the concerns of relatives about their patients? Surely the more you know about the patient, the better you can treat them. And Ruth.
So I would wholeheartely support and agree with Linda's statement that clearly as a doctor looking after a patient, it's absolutely crucial to listen to relatives and to engage and talk with relatives through the duration of a patient's stay. And I think we are doing a lot with our staff to ensure we think that they have adequate time to talk with relatives, making it easier for people to talk with relatives. But I think in terms of Linda's specific concerns, we're very keen to investigate those robustly, because I think there may be some specific learning points that come from Linda's concerns that we're not cited on. James may have more to add.
So I'd endorse everything you've said, Ruth. We'd be, both Ruth and myself would be more than happy to meet with Linda to understand the specifics that led to this question. And just to add to Ruth's comment, effective communication is really important and is a source of concerns that do bubble up through the PALs and the complaints process. So it is clearly something that we have to get right. We've got some data from the latest inpatient survey regarding the patient's perspectives of doctors. So in answer to the question, did you get clear answers to your questions from doctors? The response rate was positive in 95% of cases, which is clearly encouraging, but it does mean that in 5% of responses, people didn't feel they got clear answers to their questions. With regard to do you have confidence and trust in the doctors looking after you, the positive response was 97%, and both of these are in line with the national average, but clearly there's more work that we should do. And disappointingly, there's a trend nationally where there's a less positive response to the question, did you feel as though doctors talked in front of patients as if you were not there? There was a positive response. 80% didn't feel that occurred, but clearly 20% do, and there's a lot of work there to improve our communication. We actually perform better than the national average in that question, but 1 in 5 people have that perception, and maybe that's something we can pick up as an action plan.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for coming, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.